There is an undeniable distinctiveness to those who came of age during the 1960s. Perhaps it's the quiet tenacity with which they navigate profound crises without unraveling. Maybe it's their unsettling composure when facing extreme uncertainty. Or perhaps it's that singular fusion of idealism and grounded pragmatism, seemingly woven into the fabric of their identity. This period did more than merely influence a demographic. It expertly shaped a specific psychological structure that experts are only now beginning to fully appreciate. And when we finish exploring this landscape, you will understand precisely why growing up in that era created some of the most complex, psychologically resilient individuals walking the earth today. Let's begin with a cornerstone of the 1960s childhood, often overlooked by modern observers. Imagine yourself at 6 years old. Every school morning, you and your classmates participated in duck and cover drills. A teacher's whistle would signal the command. You crawl under your desk, tuck your head between your knees, instinctively attempting to shield yourself from an imagined nuclear detonation. While the full weight of nuclear war remained abstract, you understood enough. You knew that forces existed outside your control, capable of ending everything. The stable world your parents promised could vanish in a blinding flash. And intuitively, you grasped that the thin wooden desk above you was tragically inadequate protection. This exposure wasn't trauma in the conventional sense, it was far stranger. You were forced to embrace two contradictory truths simultaneously. The world might cease to exist tomorrow, and yet, you still had to finish your homework tonight. Psychologists label this mechanism productive cognitive dissonance. For children of the 1960s, however, this was merely the routine of a Tuesday morning. The remarkable outcome is that this ambient awareness of existential threat did not result in a generation of paralyzed, anxious adults. Instead, it produced people with an unusually practical relationship with instability. When you've rehearsed for the apocalypse before your 7th birthday, the mundane problems of adulthood lose their power to genuinely terrify. Job loss? At least it's not thermonuclear annihilation. Relationship trouble? The planet is still turning. This generation quickly absorbed the lesson that expending energy worrying about things beyond one's influence is a waste of vital resources. They developed what researchers now identify as a sophisticated psychological triage, an innate capacity to categorize problems into things I can actively change and things I must accept. This wisdom wasn't gleaned from a self-help manual. It was inoculated deep into their consciousness during those routine, unsettling drills. Now, shift focus to a pivotal Sunday night in February 1964. You are gathered with your family in the living room, focused on the television set, where 4 young Liverpudlians are performing on The Ed Sullivan Show. The audience's hysteria is so intense the music is barely audible. Your older sister is weeping. Your parents look visibly perplexed and slightly worried. But you? You are witnessing the eruption of a cultural phenomenon you have no words for yet, the birth of a seismic shift. The Beatles did not just revolutionize music, they visually demonstrated to an entire generation that the world could fundamentally transform overnight. 4 ordinary young men could rattle the foundations of established culture. What seemed permanent and immutable could become instantly obsolete in the time it took to watch a single television broadcast. This was a formative psychological lesson that went far deeper than simply changing musical tastes or fashion. The children of the 1960s learned early that change is not a generational, slow-moving process. It is immediate, sudden, and forceful. This resulted in adults who are generally less threatened by disruptive forces than other generations tend to be. They have watched entire cultural landscapes shift beneath their feet and continued to thrive. They know that today's revolution is tomorrow's normalcy, and today's certainty may be gone by next year. Yet, here is the psychological counterweight. While they witnessed radical transformation, they also endured assassination after assassination. JFK, Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy, all within 5 devastating years. They watched their aspirational heroes violently cut down, their hopes annihilated on live television. They learned that progress is not linear, that justice does not always prevail, and that tragedy and hope are permanent co-inhabitants of the human experience. This unique combination, revolutionary possibility tempered by constant, repeated loss, forged a distinct profile. Individuals who believe change is achievable, yet who harbour no naivete regarding the potential costs. They can maintain hope without being foolish. They understand that fighting for a better future does not guarantee they will live to see the victory. This is not cynicism, it is deep wisdom purchased at an immense price. Let's turn to something more personal and intimate. Picture yourself at age 8. Your mother hands you a few coins and sends you alone to the neighbourhood corner store. You navigate the route, make your selection, hand over the money, carefully count your change, and return home. This was not a rare privilege, it was the standard practice of the era. Children of the 1960s handled tangible currency from a young age, actual metal coins with weight in your pocket, and bills you could fold. You learned that money was intrinsically finite because you could physically see it leave your hand as you spent it. This physical, tactile relationship with currency established robust neural pathways that many modern children do not develop. You grasped cause and effect viscerally. Spend these coins on candy, and they are irrevocably gone. Save them, and they accumulate. There was no abstract digital number on a screen disconnecting you from the reality of the transaction. What researchers now call financial executive function, the ability to delay gratification, plan spending, and comprehend the true cost of purchases, was being constructed through this daily, lived experience. They weren't just learning about money, they were feeling it dissipate or stack up in their piggy banks. That independence extended beyond the store. Visualize this. It's 7:30 a.m. and you are walking to school. You are perhaps 6 or 7. There is no parent escorting you, no adult observing from a distance. It's just you, your books tucked under your arm as backpacks were uncommon, and the well-worn route you've memorized. You spot the house with the unfriendly dog and cross to the opposite sidewalk. You wave to Mrs. Patterson, who is tending her garden. You meet the Thompson kids at the intersection, and you finish the journey together. This daily solitary walk was far more than mere transportation. It was continuous environmental education. You learned to observe your surroundings, noticing when something was unusual or amiss. You developed internal maps, not just of streets, but of social territories. Which adults were approachable, which houses to steer clear of, and which paths were safest. Neuroscientists have discovered that this type of autonomous childhood navigation drastically enhances spatial reasoning, risk assessment capabilities, and self-reliance in ways that being driven everywhere simply cannot replicate. Your brain was literally being sculpted by the demands of independence every single morning before you even reached the classroom. Now, let's discuss the inevitability of injury, because you did get hurt. You plummeted from your banana seat bicycle racing down a hill, you scraped your knees scaling trees, you likely received a minor burn from a chemistry set that would never pass contemporary safety inspections. You took a baseball to the face playing without a helmet, and when you arrived home bruised or bleeding, your parents often delivered a response that sounds nearly cold by today's metrics. You're fine, go back outside. Your parents operated with a profound faith in your capacity, faith that you could endure discomfort, faith that you would derive lessons from the incident, and faith that shielding you from every minor scrape would cause greater psychological damage than the injuries themselves. Here is the resulting psychological architecture. People who do not catastrophize pain. They understand that hurt and damaged are fundamentally different states. They can experience physical discomfort without immediately concluding that something is profoundly wrong with the world or themselves. Burns, scratches, and scars were not emergencies to be obsessively prevented. They were badges of a life actively engaged. Modern psychology is now validating what 1960s parents seem to know instinctively. Children require exposure to manageable adversity to develop what researchers term stress inoculation. Small, controlled doses of difficulty build psychological immunity, and 1960s children received their necessary doses frequently. But the risks were not exclusively physical. Consider this scenario. It's a Saturday afternoon and you are in the driveway with your father, the hood of the family car propped open. He entrusts you with a wrench and begins explaining the engine's function. Or perhaps you are with your mother, learning to operate the sewing machine, the needle perilously close to your small fingers. Children in the 1960s were entrusted with real tools, genuine responsibilities, and tangible consequences. The Easy Bake Oven wasn't a harmless toy. It was a functioning appliance that reached temperatures sufficient to bake actual food. You could injure yourself, and that was precisely the point. Learning to be cautious around objects capable of causing harm was integral to the education. This process created adults who are not easily intimidated by complexity, who assume they possess the ability to figure things out, and who don't automatically defer to an expert for every minor issue. They grew up dismantling objects and reassembling them. They learned that most machines and most problems are considerably less mysterious than they initially appear. Let's discuss waiting. True waiting, the discipline modern society has nearly extinguished. You wanted to watch a new movie? The downtown theatre offered 1 or 2 screens. Films rotated weekly or bi-weekly. You saw what was playing now, or you waited. There was no streaming, no on-demand service, no future bookmarking. If you missed it, you might never see it. You wanted to hear your favourite song? You sat patiently by the radio, dependent on the DJ's whim. You couldn't skip tracks or download it immediately. You waited. And when it finally played, you scrambled to hit record on the tape player, praying the beginning wasn't cut off. You wanted to know the resolution of your favourite television cliffhanger. You waited an entire week. That anticipation sat unresolved in your mind for 7 long days. There was no binge-watching, no fast-forwarding, only anticipation. This persistent rhythm of wanting and waiting fundamentally rewired the brain of an entire generation. They developed an extraordinary level of what psychologists call delay tolerance. They internalized the truth that desirable things are worthy of patience. They discovered that anticipation is a form of pleasure in itself, and that value is not contingent on instant availability. In today's culture of instant gratification, those who matured in the 1960s possess this capacity for patience like a true superpower. They remain unperturbed when processes require time. They do not require constant stimulation to feel engaged. They learned young that the intervals between desires being fulfilled are not empty voids. They are rich with imagination, anticipation, and life. Now, picture a summer twilight in 1965. The streetlights have just turned on, a signal that you have, perhaps, 10 minutes before curfew. You are in a neighbour's yard with 8 other kids, concluding an intense game of tag, baseball, or some ad hoc hybrid sport with rules only you collectively understand. Crucially, there are no adults present. No one is supervising, no one is refereeing. When an argument erupts over a tag, you must resolve it yourselves. When feelings are bruised, you figure out how to continue the game. When the younger kids struggle to keep up, you decide as a group whether to adjust the rules or send them home. Every social conflict is entirely your responsibility to navigate. This daily practice in spontaneous human relations cultivated something extraordinary. These adults can instantaneously read a room, sensing tension before it manifests. They intuitively understand that what people articulate and what they truly mean are often distinct realities. They became experts in human behavior, not through formal study, but because their immediate survival and social standing depended upon astute comprehension of group dynamics. You learned which houses you could enter without knocking, and which parents required a formal greeting. You knew which children would report your actions and which would keep secrets. You mastered the art of functioning within a group while simultaneously preserving your distinct identity. These essential skills were not imparted in any classroom. They were absorbed through thousands of hours of unsupervised social interaction, producing adults with what researchers describe as high social intelligence, the effortless ability to maneuver complex interpersonal dynamics. Yet, certain experiences cut deeper than social learning. Consider the profound sensation of being a child on July 20th, 1969. You are sitting before the television, perhaps at home or in a crowded classroom, witnessing impossibly grainy footage. A man in a bulky white suit steps onto the lunar surface.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
You watch the boundary of human capability expand in real time. Everything your parents had cited as impossible, everything the world claimed could not be achieved, was happening right before your eyes. If humanity could walk on the moon, what conceivable limits remained? This moment imprinted a profound conviction onto the entire generation. A belief, both intellectual and gut level, that even the most formidable challenges can be surpassed. That human will and ingenuity can achieve the unthinkable. That the phrase, "it can't be done," is often merely a failure of imagination. When the children of the 1960s grew up to confront their own monumental obstacles, they carried this conviction. They had seen the impossible achieved. They had watched humanity reach for the stars and succeed. That sort of foundational moment is indelible. However, that profound optimism coexisted with a grim reality. The 1960s was also the decade when evening news broadcasts began featuring raw footage from Vietnam. Genuine warfare, graphic death, real bodies being carried through the jungle. You might be eating dinner while the television displayed realities that children today are rigorously shielded from. This exposure did not traditionally traumatize them, it educated them. They understood from an early age that the world contained horrific truths, that absolute safety was an illusion, that adults were fallible, and that institutional authority could be demonstrably, even catastrophically wrong. This exposure led to a generation with a complex perspective on institutions. They respect proven competence, but are suspicious of mere credentials. They commit to leaders who earn their trust, not those who simply demand compliance. They learned early that questioning authority is not disrespectful. It is at times absolutely necessary. And yet, despite all the evidence, the assassinations, the raw war footage, the nuclear drills, there is a quality of almost defiant optimism in the character of the 1960s kid. Because they also vividly recall the March on Washington. They remember the passage of the Civil Rights Act. They watched the world change for the better because people held the belief that change was possible and refused to accept defeat. They hold both essential truths in equilibrium. The world can be terrible, and yet the world can improve. Progress is viable, but never guaranteed. Hope is rational, but never naive. This nuanced psychological complexity, the ability to simultaneously believe and doubt, might be their most invaluable psychological inheritance. Let's conclude with something fundamentally personal. Picture a Saturday morning. The television is showing cartoons. You watch for a couple of hours, but then the screen goes blank. The programming ends, the station signs off, or it switches to dull adult content. You are suddenly faced with a choice: stay in the silent house or go seek activity. So, you venture outside. You walk to your friend's house and knock. You explore the creek behind the neighborhood. You construct a shelter out of scrap wood. You lie in the grass and contemplate the clouds. You become thoroughly bored, and then you become profoundly creative. This cycle, boredom leading directly to invention, was repeated countless times throughout the 1960s childhood. There was no infinite scroll, no endless catalogue of passive content, no algorithm specifically engineered to monopolize your attention. There was merely time, vast amounts of empty time, waiting to be shaped by whatever you could summon with your imagination. Neuroscientists have since confirmed that boredom actively engages the brain's default mode network, the regions responsible for stillness provided the raw material for genuine creativity, self-reflection, and the crucial ability to connect disparate ideas that others overlook. When a child in the 1960s gazed at the ceiling or meandered without purpose during a long summer afternoon, they were engaged in vital cognitive development, though they certainly weren't aware of it. These experiences forged adults who are perfectly comfortable with silence and internal quiet. They are not dependent on relentless external stimulation to feel balanced or secure. They mastered the skill of being alone with their own thoughts, a result of deep, lifelong practice. In our contemporary era of perpetual digital distraction, this foundational capacity for quiet introspection is both vanishingly rare and immensely precious. Now, recall the moments when life delivered a setback, the failed exam, the decisive loss in a game, or the sting of not being selected for the team. Crucially, look at what was absent. There was no immediate rush to mend your emotional state. No one bestowed a participation trophy. No one attempted to redefine loss as a moral victory. Instead, you absorbed the full, unadulterated impact of disappointment, shame, or failure. What transpired next was truly remarkable. You persevered. The immediate catastrophe did not materialize. The feeling eventually subsided. From this, you assimilated a priceless lesson. You possess a far greater capacity for endurance than you realize. This was not an act of intentional cruelty disguised as moral development. It was simply the reality of existence. Defeat is inevitable. Failure is sometimes necessary. Circumstances frequently deviate from expectations. When this happens, the only meaningful intervention is to assist someone in rising again. Children of the 1960s internalized this doctrine repeatedly. What modern psychologists term frustration tolerance, the essential ability to navigate adversity without collapsing, was systematically forged within them by a steady stream of minor letdowns that were neither preempted nor immediately remedied. They understood intuitively that failure holds critical data, that losing provides instruction unavailable through victory, and that genuine resilience is defined not by the lack of struggle, but by the sheer willingness to persist, regardless of the pain. These individuals embody traits that the contemporary world urgently requires. They recall the sensation of being trusted with responsibility, of being afforded the space to struggle, and of figuring things out without constant surveillance. They remember a childhood that was admittedly a little perilous, yet profoundly free. They stand as living validation that resilience is not an inherent trait. It is a quality meticulously constructed over time. Competence is the fruit of deliberate practice, not preemptive protection. Furthermore, the greatest legacy one can bestow is not a sanitized, effortless route, but the deep-seated confidence required to navigate any challenge hurled their way. Amid rising global anxiety and pervasive fragility, this generation serves as proof of an alternative methodology. It was not a faultless path, nor one devoid of hardship, but it was a method that forged individuals capable of weathering profound societal storms, adapting fluidly to change, and clinging fiercely to hope, even when cynicism seemed pragmatic. They matured in a decade defined by stark contrasts: assassinations and lunar triumphs, seismic cultural shifts and existential nuclear dread, radical freedom and devastating loss. Perhaps because of this relentless duality, they developed the rare psychological capacity to contain contradiction, to hold the hope alongside the horror, the sincere joy alongside the profound grief, the conviction that improvement is possible alongside the sober knowledge that it might not be guaranteed. This is the profound psychological blueprint of those shaped in the 1960s, and it is a blueprint we would all be wise to examine and understand more thoroughly.